In response to everyone's response to my reading, I wanted to go a little bit further and be able to provide a presentation on the reasoning behind the book. And I think a big part of this story is the background in towards Holden and who he is and the environment in which he interacts. So I wanted to be able to provide this presentation like I usually do when I go around to school or community to community. Whoever invites me, I always give this presentation. To begin, I am an author and I did illustrate this book behind me right here. But what I do, and at the heart of what I do, is higher education. And so I do work for Navajo Technical University. I'm the communications director, where I handle all of the university's marketing, advertising, and PR type of work, in hopes of attracting individuals to higher education and then retaining and graduating them. So that's what I do. I think it is important because within my background, I am a graphic design meddler, I guess, every now and then. So this billboard you see, this is stuff like I would create. But that's something that helped contribute to this book. Having that experience, having that background really helped contribute to the design of the book. I come from a small community known as Haystack, New Mexico. In Navajo, it's called Zitlachi, meaning Red Mountain. And I think it's important to me where you come from, because where you come from kind of helps indicate who you are. And if you don't know Haystack, it is a region with a layered history. It is where they discovered uranium. Gentleman and another famous Irish Navajo by the name of Patty Martinez was said to have discovered uranium in the region. That's where I come from. It's also on checkerboard land, so it is where there is a lot of cultural integration, a lot of influence. I think it's important to introduce myself in that way because it's where my father's from, his father, and their family before that. So I think coming from that area is big in representing who you are. In my reading, I did start by indicating who I was by clan. So if you were to go back and hear it, I mention it by the traditional Navajo clan system. And this is important in Navajo culture because it establishes relations between individuals, which is good in helping sustain, the family unit, but then extended family, beyond that, community and nation. And it's something that's always sustained the Navajo people. So when I introduce myself in schools, I always do it in this manner. First speaking to, my first clan, which is through your mom. My mom is Irish. So I always say Irish and Schley. I'm Irish. I always tell the kids that I'm the luckiest Navajo that you'll ever meet because I am Irish Navajo. So I always tease them, if you rub my head, then you'll get an A on your test. And they'll come up and rub my head and wish for luck. But I always say that that's a big part of me, is I'm Irish. That's from my mom. My second clan is from my dad by way of his mom, and my grandma's name, Bessie Desiderio Vandever. She is Kiani. Kianis were traditionally the educators or the leaders within the tribe, and so I used to hate it growing up because everyone within my family is in education. I have an uncle who was teacher, then a principal. My mom's in special education. My sister's math teacher into principal. So, every time I'd come home from school when I was growing up, they'd be talking about IEPs or, doing stuff within the classroom where they're naughty kids, and I'd hate it, but being Kiani, that's in my blood, so that's a big part of who I am. Here I am, 25 years later, working in higher education from when I used to be miserable at dinner, but that's because it's who I am. My third clan is I am Irish, again through my mom, and then my fourth clan is I'm Tachini, or the Red Running Into the Water clan, and that's from my grandpa from my dad's side. Grandpa is Joe Vandever Sr., and so, I have that warrior spirit within me, and that's part of, again, my clan and who I am. So that's my family and how I identify myself as a Navajo individual. I think it's important in establishing that because it gives you some glimpse into who I am, which in turn helps you better understand this book as well. So one of the things that I do when I give readings to students is I do ask them if they've ever heard of the Navajo Code Talkers. And a lot of them do. They raise their hand and they give their bits of knowledge, and I think that's important because they are a big part of not only Navajo history but American history. And to understand that and what they did helps influence what I wanted to use this book as a tool for. During the World War II, the U.S. was in a standstill in the Pacific, and codes were being intercepted, messages, and it was really delaying any sign of progress. And so a code was established around the Navajo language, which allowed the U.S. to send messages in the battlefields within the Pacific. Throughout the entire war, not one message was intercepted. They said that because of the Navajo language, millions of lives were saved. It helped end the war. I figured that if my grandfather could use the Navajo language to help end war and save millions of lives, I could use words and language in the same fashion in helping establish discussions, create discourse around histories that haven't always been discussed, which to me have limited, progress and improving situations that can improve quality of life on the Navajo Nation. So I wanted to use my words and language in the same fashion as my grandfather. Now I think it's important to introduce yourself on where you're from, where you work, who your family is. But if you really want to get to know somebody, I think you really have to look at them as a kid. And if you were to look at me, little me, before I was 7, I was one of those kids who was really active, was bouncing off of walls, would get into little mischief every now and then. So I always show within my presentations this picture of me bobbing for apples when I was young and during Halloween. And of course we can't be doing this these days given the conditions, but within the picture you see that I'm cheating basically with bobbing for apples. You're supposed to dip your head down in, bite an apple, come up, and then that's the game, that's the reward, you get an apple. But for me in the picture I'm using my hands, and you see a little girl saying, what the heck is he doing? Because I was cheating. That was the kind of kid I was, and I wasn't a really bad kid. If you look at this picture right here, this guy doesn't look like he's a naughty kid who goes around harming kids or causing trouble. I look like I'm a future president, like I'm Jonathan Nez sitting straight up. But if you look at the picture, I was true to who I was. I'm having a one-of-a-kind knitted sweater of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I had the knee pads, and I had these nice fresh pair of kicks, some Velcro strap-ons. Top strap used to say Turtle, the bottom one said Power. I was fresh for back in the day in the 90s. But that's who I was. I was an active kid. Now, a big thing happened to me when I was in 2nd grade. Is that my family moved from New Mexico, where I had a lot of family and friends. We moved 1,000 miles east to St. Louis, Missouri. And if you ever heard of the community, Ferguson, we were the neighboring community called Florissant. Used to go to school in the Ferguson-Florissant School District, and it was a shock to me because it was something that was outside of my comfort zone. Didn't really have much family out there, and there really wasn't anybody who looked like me, so I always talk about this within my presentations because when I arrived, as foreign it was to me, I was as foreign to my classmates, and it led to a lot of tensions and discussions like, who are you? What are you? I remember a few conversations when I first began. I'd show up to class and somebody would be like, what are you? I'm like, what? Like, what are you? I was like, I'm a boy. What are you talking about? I'm like, no, not that. I mean, are you Mexican? I was like, no, I'm not Mexican. I'm Navajo. They'd be like, what? What's Navajo? I'd be like, Native American. They'd be like, scratching their heads, not really comprehending. Like, well, where's your feather? What? Where's your teepee? And it's hard for kids to understand who I was because to me, the only representations they had were in cartoons, perhaps, or logos from professional sports teams, and it led to a lot of tensions. This was my third grade class. Got there in second grade, but you looked at my classroom and it really was half Caucasian and half African American, and then me right here in the middle. So the first thing I wanted to do was address that diversity in children's literature. For that purpose of addressing diversity and showing representation of what a modern day Native American looks like. And so that was one of my goals from the onset. I also wanted to address early literacy. Working for a tribal college and university, a large majority of our students do require developmental education, and so it was important for me to also figure out a way in which we could start addressing that problem. And the best way I feel for myself and my experience was to start young, and so I wanted to be able to incorporate different literacy techniques within the book that could help with reading, because it is something that is needed nationwide, in fact. And then the third purpose was I did want to address modern day education, particularly boarding school era education. A big part of how I feel I've been shaped growing up has been what my father went through as a boarding school student, and so I wanted to be able to use this book as a means to address that history. In 2015, the Cooperative Children's Book Center, School of Education, University of Wisconsin-Madison, had developed this graphic on the diversity in children's books for the year 2015. And I always had the idea of creating a book. I wanted to create something for my nephew as a present, but what really stimulated me was that in this study in 2015, less than 1% of books were about somebody who was Native American or First Nations. And so I wanted to be able to write something that helped turn that tide a bit. This graphic, it's really important. It's called The House of Mirrors. It really depicts the situation or this belief or thought that if you see yourself in media or within books, you can imagine yourself being that. So if you're seeing yourselves within books as a king or an astronaut, you imagine yourself in that way. And so this graphic in 2015 showed that about 3 out of every 4 books were about somebody who was Caucasian or white. The next biggest subgroup was inanimate objects like animals or trucks. And then as you went down the scale, you saw less and less representation of people of color. So this was something I definitely wanted to address in carrying this message forth. I had mentioned that I also wanted to talk about early literacy. So that was a big part of wanting to be able to build readers. And so I had a direct intent of using this book to start or create opportunities where parents or grandparents could read to kids, intimate moments where literacy could be the focus. You'll see that the book does have different types of literary techniques that were used in order to help reinforce reading, such as repetition. If you go back and read the book, you hear consistently, "We all fall in line. We all fall in line." Of course, this is the voice of Holden's classmates, but it could also be seen as a way to have your child or whoever's reading get that ingrained in their head, so when it comes to that point, they see the words, recognize them, and then be able to make that association. Within the book, you also see that cadence and rhyme was used. This was used for the effect of having the thought of kids marching in place. We move slowly in silence with no words of defiance. We all fall in line. It's kind of written to the effect that it is to a march. And then lastly, I think the big part of it was being able to tell that part of history that is often hidden or swept under the rug at times, and that's boarding school era education. I always ask wherever I go and do a reading, who's ever been to boarding school or knows what boarding school is, and you'll have people raising their hand and giving their different accounts. And it means a lot of different things to different people. But for me and my family in particular, particularly my dad, it was an experience that wasn't positive. It was something that really derailed at the core of who he was. He used to tell stories of speaking Navajo and having to stuff his pants because he gets spanked so much. Or he always tells a story of the kids having, everyone would have the same haircut, or if you're a girl, you would have your bangs cut straight down and then all the way around, so it kind of looked like you had a mushroom on your head. For my dad and the boys, he said he'd have his whole head shaved except for his bangs. So if he got in trouble, they could pull him by it and yank him over here. Hey, get over here, Obi. Don't do that. So, boarding school and that impact, I think, has had a profound impact on who we are as Navajo today and how we function even. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to discuss that history, because what more intimate of a conversation could a kid have with a parent in regards to that history than over a children's book? And so it was my intent to be able to start conversations around that. I think we're lucky that many schools today allow language and culture to be reinforced in the classroom, but it wasn't always the case, and I think it's important to raise that history I had done. So that's really the purpose behind the book. If you want to take this time to pause the video and go to the book and then look for those literary techniques and maybe think about my history and see if you could see me within that character. But I think that's a big part of what this book is. So we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. So hit pause. So I hope you enjoyed the story and were able to make connections from part 1. I think that background helps contribute to the understanding of who Holden is and what he represents, which to me at the heart of it is celebrating the innocence of the child's imagination, and the creativity and the beauty of being oneself. And so I wanted to promote that because I think oftentimes in today's society that's suppressed in a lot of different ways. I know this is a story about a Navajo child in the boarding school education system, but anyone who has a child in schools today I think can relate to it, especially when you see cuts to the arts or music, things that help foster the imagination. And so I always show this graphic right here of a child who is exposed to art and the beauty of creativity. Their world becomes a lot brighter and expands, but when you're stuck in the classroom, it's really tedious and can be quite boring and robotic, or gets to a point where not even the teacher's enjoying herself. So I think it's important to be able to promote creativity with this book, because that's its intention. If we're going to be able to create any type of change within this world, I think it's going to create outside the box thinking. And that's kind of the climate of which this book arose during this time. If you recall, there was activities such as No Dapple with the pipeline. You had Colin Kaepernick in the NFL taking a kneel for injustices against young black unarmed men. And then things like the little girl on Wall Street against the bull on Wall Street, really signifying equal rights for women and empowerment. So I think within each of these movements you see Holden, and I wanted to capture that as well. At the same time, what really encouraged me to write this book was a column that was written in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch back in 2015. It was an article on why the Redskins should change their name, and in the comment section there was a lot of public backlash for this journalist who wrote this piece. Some of the comments that were said were things like, ignorance is bliss. Native Americans are not U.S. citizens. They are citizens of their tribe. Let's keep politics out of the sports page. I guess Mr. Hockman has a bunk of Indian friends who have been complaining. The sentence right here kind of shows the need for literacy and being able to read and write. But the individual went on to say, or maybe he has been you on some of the reservations taking polls. The only people I have heard making this an issue are white people. Give it a rest. What garbage. Let's stop with the abject political correctness. I have 2 close friends who are Indian, and even they think this is stupid, as do most American Indians. The Redskins are the Redskins, and if a few people choose to be offended, they can just be pathetic or get over it. get over it. You see comments like that and you hear histories of where I come from or what my father had to go through. And it makes you question, where does this come from? It does make you a little angry, but at the same time, it makes you wonder what people have been exposed to. How many Indians have they actually met or have known or associated with on a day-to-day basis? I think without that representation, it leads to a lot of ignorance. And so that's what I've been doing, for the past 3 years, is just going around from community to community, school to school, reading this book, relaying the importance of why we need diversity in literature, talking about boarding school era education, and really promoting to kids the importance of being able to read and to communicate and to, I think above all else, is to appreciate themselves. I've been all over the country, spoke to schools, museums, conferences, and I think this is a message that I've been trying to carry, because I feel like these types of discussions is where change happens. And over the past 3 years, I would say that I've given over 35 readings to over 3,500 individuals. And so I think with this discourse, it's important, and you see people respond to it. You see activities in schools where kids are using it as a way to understand or navigate storytelling, or it's used within robotics. I saw on Twitter one time, I don't know if it was a robotics club or a class, but they used the story layout of visiting classroom to classroom to navigate this robot to go from door to door. So you see that type of work, and it makes you feel like what you're doing has meaning. And you see some results. In 2018, they ended up coming up with an updated graphic, and I think we should be happy because we did see some gains. We increased 0.01% to now 1% of books have been having representation from Native American indigenous cultures. So there has been more balance within the distribution of books, but again, this could be improved moving into the future. So that was a big part of it. So that was my book. I want to thank you guys for tuning in and really listening towards what the purpose or intent of the book was. Hopefully it gives you some insight in towards why I created it, and we'll give you an opportunity to go back and see the book in a new through a new lens. So again, I hope everyone's doing well. Hope everyone's taking care of each other, and spread this to anyone who wants to have some insight into this book, because it could be used in any type of way, whether that be a lesson or a discussion. Let's keep those conversations going. Yeah.
Skip it, throw the script out the window. Wind blows, I feel my skin glow. Skin so indigo when the sun go. We grow ideas to lead us, remind us, rewind us, and blind us from the colors of the infinite cleansing. Remember the past to find the path of brightness. With my mic and my sidekick, swift kick to the system. Listen, we lust for love and trust and rise above all of the above. Take it back, relax, rewind it back. Listen to the track one more time. We go, we grow, still the same, in and out of this picture frame. In the end, don't it all just fall away? Don't it all just fall away? Trying to say